It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend at the lake cabin, just me, my wife, and the quiet hum of nature. We'd finally escaped the chaos of the city, ready to relax, fish, and enjoy some much-needed time away. But that calm was shattered early. Saturday morning, when the front door nearly flew off its hinges from furious pounding, and there she was, Karen from the HOA, screaming, her head off on our porch like a scene straight out of a bad movie. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She just barged in, yelling about some unauthorized structure and demanding access to our private property. Her eyes scanned the room like she owned the place, and her tone made it clear she thought she had every right to be there. My wife stood frozen at first, but then quietly walked toward the back room without saying a word. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy shouting about rules, bylaws, and violations no one had ever heard of. That's when everything changed. The moment my wife returned and unlocked the gun-safe calm, steady, not saying a word, Karen's entire demeanor flipped. You could see the color drain from her face as she realized she'd pushed way too far this time. Suddenly, the shouting stopped. The tough act vanished. What happened next? Well, let's just say it's the reason asterisk this story needs to be told asterisk, because sometimes the people who bark the loudest are the ones who break first. Now, let me back up a bit. This wasn't our first run-in with Karen. Ever since we bought the lake cabin, she's made it her personal mission to remind us who really runs the community. She's the head of the HOA board, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you know exactly the type. Clipboard in hand, fake smile, always just enforcing the rules. But lately, things had escalated. First, it was passive-aggressive notes on our door. Then came the fines for things that didn't even make sense, like the color of our mailbox or leaving a kayak out too long. We tried to ignore it. We paid what we had to, even when it felt unfair. We just wanted peace. But Karen didn't stop. She showed up randomly, sometimes late in the evening, snapping pictures, walking the property like it was hers. My wife had warned me that something wasn't right with her, that this went beyond petty HOA drama. And after today, I knew she was right. The safe wasn't open to threaten anyone. It was just a silent reminder that we knew our rights, and we weren't going to be bullied. But watching Karen go from furious to frozen in just a few seconds, that said more than words ever could. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. You don't push someone like Karen back without consequences. And as I looked out the window later that day, I noticed her car still parked across the road, just sitting there, engine off, watching. The strange part was, Karen never got back in her car. She just sat there, staring at the cabin like she was waiting for something or someone. My wife and I stayed inside, watching from behind the blinds, trying to figure out what her game was. This wasn't just about HOA violations anymore. Felt personal, like she was trying to provoke us into making a mistake. My wife whispered that she'd seen Karen talking to a few neighbors last week, looking real serious like they were planning something. That's when it clicked. Karen had been trying to build a case against us, maybe to get us kicked out of the HOA entirely. We'd heard rumors about her doing it to other families, people who stood up to her or questioned her authority. One couple sold their cabin and left with barely a word. Another got hit with fines so big they ended up in court. Maybe we were next on her list. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the dock pretending to fish, just to clear my head and see if she'd move. She didn't, but I noticed a man standing near the edge of the woods, someone I'd never seen before. He wasn't fishing, wasn't hiking, just standing still, watching our cabin. When I looked back again a few minutes later, he was gone. No car, no sound. Just gone. Something bigger was happening here. And somehow, Karen wasn't acting alone. That night, the air felt heavier than usual still, but not peaceful. Like the whole place was holding its breath. We double-checked the doors, made sure the cameras we'd installed after the last HOA incident were all working. Around midnight, my wife nudged me awake. She'd heard something movement outside near the back of the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the rear window, careful not to make a sound. That's when I saw it. A figure crouching near our property line, right by the shed where we store tools and old gear. It wasn't Karen. This person moved differently fast. Quiet, like they'd done this before. I called out, loud enough to be heard, hoping to scare them off. They bolted into the trees, but not before the light caught a flash of something on their Jackatan HOA badge. Not a security guard, not a cop, just someone who thought the rules gave them power to trespass at night. My wife pulled me back from the window. She was shaking now, not with fear, but with frustration. "This isn't about violations," she said. "They want us gone." Suddenly, my phone lit up with a new email from the HOA board. It was a notice of a formal complaint filed against us for threatening behavior earlier that day. No mention of Karen entering uninvited. No mention of trespassing. Just their version of the story. And as the wind picked up and rustled through the trees, I realized this wasn't just cabin drama anymore. This was war. By the next morning, I was ready to go straight to the county sheriff's office. But before I could grab my keys, a white SUV pulled into our driveway. No plates, no decals. Two men in plain clothes stepped out, one holding a manila folder, the other wearing mirrored sunglasses that never left my face. They introduced themselves as private compliance officers working with the HOA. Not law enforcement, not legal officials, just hired muscle with clipboards and a fake sense of authority. They said they were there to follow up on the complaint against us and needed access to the property for an inspection. I told them no, politely but firmly. That's when the taller one smiled, reached into his folder, and pulled out something that made my stomach turn. A copy of a petition. A petition to have our ownership rights challenged under some obscure HOA clause tied to member misconduct. And at the top of the signature list, Karen's name, followed by nearly a dozen others, neighbors we'd waved to, shared firewood with, even one who'd borrowed our generator during a storm last year. That betrayal stung harder than anything else, but that wasn't the worst part. At the very bottom of the form was a hand-scrawled note. Initiate Phase 2 if resistance continues. Phase 2? What did that even mean? Suddenly, this wasn't just about harassment. This felt organized, coordinated, and judging by how fast things were moving. We weren't just fighting the HOA anymore. We were being hunted from the inside. I knew we had to act fast. I wasn't about to let some twisted HOA Phase 2 plan push us off our own land. I called a friend of mine, retired attorney, real sharp, told him everything. Within hours, he was at the cabin with a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, highlighting the exact clause they were twisting. Turns out, what they were trying to do wasn't just unethical, was illegal, and the signatures. Half of them weren't even valid residents. A few were seasonal renters. One name didn't even exist on record. My friend said it was clear as day. This was a power grab, plain and simple. That evening, with my wife by my side, we showed up uninvited to the emergency HOA meeting Karen had organized at the community hall. I walked in holding a stack of evidence, security footage, audio recordings, and legal notes. When I started reading aloud Karen's own messages from a neighborhood group chat we'd been quietly added to, the room went dead silent. People started whispering, some even standing up and walking out. Then came the twist. From the back of the room, the HOA treasurer stood up and dropped a bomb. Karen had been using HOA funds to pay those compliance officers. No approval. No records. Nothing. It had all been her little side operation funded by the very people she was trying to control. The board dissolved the petition on the spot. We thought it was over. But the next morning, our mailbox was smashed a handwritten note. Inside read, ***, you may have won the meeting. But this isn't finished. ***, after finding that note, we knew Karen wasn't going to walk away quietly. But something had changed. The rest of the neighborhood had seen the truth, how far she was willing to go to control everyone. Voted to suspend her immediately, and a full audit of the HOA began. We gave everything we had to the sheriff's office, including the footage and petition copies. A few weeks later, we heard Karen had lawyered up. Turns out, misusing HOA funds isn't something that gets brushed under the rug in a small town. As for us, we decided to stay. We reinforced the cabin with better lighting, security cameras, and motion alerts. My wife planted a new garden where the broken mailbox had been, like a quiet way of saying we weren't going anywhere. And the neighbors, the ones who stayed, started stopping by more often. Some apologized. Others just brought over coffee or firewood and sat with us for a while. It didn't erase what happened, but it showed us we weren't alone anymore. Looking back, the whole thing started as a simple HOA dispute, but it turned into something bigger. It was about power, control, and what happens when one person pushes too far. We stood our ground, not with threats, not with anger, but with facts, community, and a whole lot of patience. And that's the thing about people like Karen. They count on fear and silence.